You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. And as always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Thank you for listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. We have brought back two old friends for this week. They came on about a month ago and made all sorts of election predictions and commentary, neither of which we will mention on today's podcast interview. But they're both wonderful, incredibly talented, incredibly bright, super funny journalists. And we're going to start with Kayla Dwyer from the Indianapolis Star, and I'm going to let her talk a little bit about her newsletter, which is terrific. And I know it's not just hers, but she's the guest. And after that, we're going to hear for a few minutes from LoBianco, so he can talk about his newsletter, which is often cited by me when I talk to other folks. So, Kayla, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Your turn.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be here. Yes, Kayla Dwyer is my name. Work for Indy Star, and I'm one of three-ish bylines. It depends. My editor currently is on maternity leave, so right now it's three bylines on our politics newsletter, along with my colleagues Brittany Carloni and Haley Colombo. And it's called Checks and Balances. If I'm pretty sure the link is indystar.com/newsletters is where you'll find all of our newsletters, and you can look for it and subscribe. It comes out every Friday morning. And we pretty much go very quickly through the week's news, but we also have tidbits and different kinds of sections, things that we've seen on social or behind closed doors, or it's a hodgepodge mishmash of what's going on around the state, local, national, etc., but very much Indiana focused. And we work hard on it, and we hope you like it.
Kayla, is there anything that wasn't included in the newsletter since the last time you appeared on Leaders and Legends that perhaps would have been newsletter worthy? He's tall, he's handsome, he has gray hair.
My nuptials?
Yeah.
Perhaps, you know what? Probably should have. Yeah, we didn't even think to put that in there.
I noticed. That's why I'm asking.
We're humble over here at Indy Star.
Tom, go
Yes,
ahead.
I got married, and he's also a journalist, but he works for Mirror Indy, so we won't speak of it. No, I'm kidding.
Congrats, Kayla. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tilo.
I am Tom LoBianco, formerly of the Associated Press and the Indianapolis Star out in Indiana. I am now a member of the independent media. As it turns out, right as the legacy mainstream media was collapsing and I started my independent media outlet, 24Site News, you can check it out at 24SIGHT 24site.news. It turns out I was only independent media for a year, because now the independent media is the mainstream media again. Here we go.
Hey, man, Elon Musk tells me I'm the media. Please subscribe to Tom's newsletter. I get it. And read it without fail. Besides being one of the most honest people I've ever met. Both Kayla and Tom are, but Tom, I've known a little bit longer. One of the most honest people in the business. Tom also holds the records for the most email addresses for him and any one of my contacts. I don't know if you've hit double digits yet. It's pretty close.
I had a friend look at my resume years ago, and he's, Tom, you look like you're homeless. This is part of the reason I'm an independent journalist. Turns out the one thing that's steady is creating your own thing.
Thank you so much for your time. We have about 40 minutes or so. I wanted to bring you back. The elections in the state went pretty much as expected, despite some last second sort of hoping, and we'll say that in a nice way, from the Democrats here in the Hoosier State. The federal was much more of a surprise. I'm not Mark Lauder, but I was on TV here, Channel 13 in Indianapolis. And so, Mark Lauder, if you're listening, congratulations, my friend. You deserve it.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I was shocked at what happened. Not because I didn't necessarily want it to happen, because these swing states are just so unpredictable. So we're going to get into that. I'd like to start with the state, because I think there's just a little bit less to talk about. Kayla, you've been covering the state house and politics now in Indianapolis for quite a while. Did anything happen on election day in Indiana that surprised you? Margin of, not just win or loss, but margin of victory, anything?
Actually, no. It was, as you alluded to, there was a lot of hubbub toward the end there when the governor's race. And there were indicators that even the Braun campaign and some people on the R side had some numbers that at least gave them a little bit of pause, that maybe the margins wouldn't be as much of a blowout. And so I wondered if that might be the case still. And then so when the race was called at 7 p.m. on the dot again, I at first was like, oh, okay. But when you think about it more critically, it really isn't surprising because of today's entrenchment and partisanship being the leading predictor of how you're going to vote. People really do just come home. Ultimately, it really was a night full of unsurprising news.
I was on the Channel 13 set when they called it at 7. And Tom, I'm going to ask you about this as well, because you obviously know about Indiana politics. I was very surprised, if only because of the fact that Indiana is in 2 time zones. And so I thought, man, if she's actually within single digits, this could be a long night, because Lake County, a significant Democratic stronghold, is on Central Time. I think isn't Vandenberg County on Central Time. Bill just elected a Democratic mayor. So anyway,
that's what happens when you're on Central Time.
Yeah. Actually, Jim Shell and I interviewed Mitch Daniels for a future podcast, and
nice.
We spent a significant amount of time talking about daylight savings, which I hope the next president ends, by the way. Probably be his greatest legacy if he does. But Kayla, let me ask you, so many Democrats I talk to concede Republican dominance in the state.
Yeah.
But they also conceded they believed it would be closer because of what they thought was going to be a dispositive issue, and that is abortion rights. Indiana was the first state to enact abortion restrictions. They are significantly tight. It hasn't really played out in 22 or 24. The restrictions were passed before the 22 elections. Isn't that correct, Kayla?
Yeah, exactly. So we already saw that Republicans were still rewarded for it. So I don't really know why that was such a point that they hung on, to be honest.
What were you hearing when it's a Republican state, but women are angry and they're going to, because there are obviously examples throughout the country where women voters came in droves and they're beating propositions, they're winning referenda to restore abortion rights. Why do you think that just didn't translate here?
I think it's because we don't have the opportunity here to separate abortion from the broader partisan picture, because we don't have voter referenda. Like, citizens can't lead citizen-led ballot initiatives to be able to have a referendum on that topic alone. I don't think people's opinions about abortion are enough to overcome their partisanship in a state where, again, you can't separate those things because there's no separate election for abortion. I just think people ultimately came home to their parties. And like Jennifer McCormick really did hammer home abortion, but like we said earlier, Indiana already rewarded its lawmakers for that, and or didn't punish them, I should say.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't fully understand why that was such a hang up. I actually think, though, I think a lot of the source of hope on the Democrat side, I actually heard more about Micah Beckwith than I did about abortion. I feel just the messaging so much was about the far right radical craziness on the other side, and they hoped to get some crossover from moderate Republicans. That was where their only
Yeah.
hope really lied, right? Because they just wouldn't have the numbers otherwise.
Abortions can't be quoted.
Guess not.
Michael Beckwith can be quoted.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Sorry. I was like, what?
And does it matter? Put Micah aside for just 1 second, because I want to talk about the governor-elect Mike Braun, and there's no real sense talking about Jim Banks. That was a foregone conclusion.
Oh, yeah.
Congratulations to him, a true patriot. But does it matter in these contests when social issues are seem to be either dominant or one side wants it to dominate, right? Wants them to dominate? That Mike Braun just came out and said, yeah, I'm pro-life. I wouldn't change a thing. And I got other things to do, which seemed to be in some regard his response. Yeah, I'm pro-life. I've always been. I support this, but here's what we're going to do in Indiana.
Does it matter that he took that tack, you're saying?
Yeah, in the sense that he didn't backtrack. He didn't go, oh, maybe we should. Because a lot of Republicans get mad at other Republicans because they always seem to be backtracking or trying to play it too cute by half because they want to get invited to the right soirees. That's something Tom hears all the time in D.C. But Braun just said, this is who I am. I support it. Now let's talk about jobs. Now let's talk about education.
I do think that helps solidify his case among Republicans. If you're a moderate Republican and Mike Braun saying, I think the abortion law was fine and we don't need to do anything else. He supports IVF. He certainly doesn't, he's not saying like he would take the state in some even further right direction. It seems like he's painting himself to be a fairly safe choice for even those moderate Republicans who the Democrats are trying to sway. And Micah Beckwith can say a bunch of things. I know he doesn't like the abortion ban and thinks it didn't go far enough, but most people are just voting for the governor, right? I think the outsized influence of the lieutenant governor is perhaps thought about much more often among folks like us, among the media, admittedly, than it is among the average person.
He was clearly more news.
Yeah.
Than any of the other three people on the ticket, especially if you think, look, Braun's going to win. So we know what we're getting with him. Beckwith is a new guy. He doesn't pull punches. So let's talk about him. Last question. Was there ever a time, because you were so much closer to it than I was, Caleb, where you thought McCormick, like, she's got an actual chance? I know the Democrat Governors Association put in all this money and that started the buzz. He had some people coming in to campaign with her, but your intuition as someone who was writing the stories and covering the campaigns, did you think, man, this would be a great story to cover if she could win?
That thought did occur to me, but not in a sense of I actually thought it would happen. The more precise thought that occurred to me was, she might actually have a shot at getting a margin that's not this wide, getting a somewhat competitive margin. And what would an interesting story to cover would be, is this the beginning of a pendulum swing back for Democrats? I never honestly thought that she would actually win, just briefly thought maybe there's a shot at some smaller margin.
All right, LoBianco, you have 30 seconds. Explain national politics. 29.
America is really
28.
into Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, and
they elected the only guy as president who can talk to all three.
Yeah. And daylight. Oh, you know what? America finally got right on daylight savings time.
Let me ask you a question. You've covered Indiana. Kayla just did a fabulous job taking us through it. I'd love to ask you more about Indiana politics if I thought there was more to ask, but let's just go national real quick. I was not surprised Trump won. I was significantly surprised at the margin by which he won. was
Yeah,
victorious. Were you surprised?
I
Either of those
was.
things?
I was surprised by the movement, who showed up, who didn't show up. What was the reasoning for this? My friend, a former Hoosier, actually, a Hoosier expat, Patrick Finkston, and I host a podcast at 24 Sites called the Ground Game Podcast. And one of the people that we had on just before the election, whose analysis turned out to be just perfect, was Mike Madrid, one of the co-founders of the Lincoln Project, former executive director of the California Republican Party, and an expert on the Latino vote. And this actually tracked with, we'd had on Adrian Carrasquillo, who's a former reporter for BuzzFeed, and I've worked with him at the Messenger for a hot minute. I will point out that 24 Site News has lasted longer than the Messenger did. Oh, yes,
Please
absolutely. And Adrian made the same point that Madrid did, which is Democrats were not understanding Latino culture. Often the inherent small c traditional conservatism, social conservatism of Latino culture, also not understanding grouping people together. I've heard John Leguizamo talk a little bit about this, where you put Latinos from South America, to a degree Central America, together with Tejanos. Exactly. Yeah, you can't. It's and that lack of understanding.
The Cubans are completely different. Forgive me. The Cubans are completely different.
Mm-hmm.
It's go ahead, but you're exactly right.
Oh, and right, exactly. Then you get into the pecking order, which is hilarious and incredibly consequential. It reminds me of when Pence was doing these envoys almost down to South Florida, and I was like, now that is quite the shadow campaign.
He was trying to learn Spanish.
That's right, exactly.
So Trump winning all the swing states.
That was big. Yeah.
Surprising? Did you think she can't lose Michigan? If she loses Michigan, she doesn't have a chance in hell of winning. So she's got to win that.
I thought, and I wrote about this in my first real 24/7. I took a couple of days off after the election to sleep. And after I woke up, I actually sat down and wrote a real newsletter as opposed to an instant take. And I called it the cell phone election. And if you look at it, this was really the first election where in 2016, you have the ascendance of social media in the elite class, media, politicians, celebrities, that kind of world, but not as a dominant way of moving votes in a normal sense of it. 2020 is a fluke because we're all on lockdown. So you're still, here in front of big screens, televisions, laptops, what have you. 2024 was really the first time where people were guided by their cell phones. And what we now understand better than ever, the dominant media is what comes through on the cell phones. This oversized impact of Joe Rogan, the incredible power of YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, which feels a lot like TikTok. X, absolutely. Yeah, X. It was the first time. And what that did was, not having a shared media landscape meant that, and I experienced this myself as a reporter, the algorithm kept me in a media lane where it's January 6th. Trump said that people are eating cats and dogs, and he's going to put Liz Cheney in jail after they shoot her, or whatever the hell that was. But over here, for all the guys at the sports bars, watching game day, and they got FanDuel downloaded, all right, they were getting constant advertising saying that Kamala Harris is putting people in prison through transgender surgeries, and your kid's turning gay. And that was incredibly powerful. Think back to the 2004 aftermath. We often talked, this was like, oh my God, micro-targeting, right? There's always, after every election, there's always some measure of post-mortem that happens for the losing side. 2004 was when the ascendance of Karl Rove and micro-targeting, understanding that really. 2008 was the adjustment for that with Obama and their understanding of Facebook advertising. 2024 was really, people live in these silos. And Chris LaCivita, the co-campaign manager of the Trump campaign, understood that better than anybody. Ironically, one of the people behind the '04 re-election for W. I think we're still living with that. We're still adjusting to this. If you look at Trump just had his thing, so we're doing this on Monday, December 16th. He just had his press conference down at Mar-a-Lago with SoftBank, and it's on the heels of Disney settling for $15 million in the defamation suit with George Stephanopoulos. One of the questions that he got there was about, all right, will you look at suing social media and news influencers too, if you don't like what they say? And he was like, yeah, I would. And newspapers, mostly newspapers. The Des Moines Register, Ann Selzer's bad.
Wait a second. That poll was,
horrific.
You got one word for it?
Horrific.
Kayla, let me make sure that I get you in on this national, because then I want to talk about something that two things that I think are horrifically underrated. I'm not the only one, but they're so basic and fundamental, but they tend to get lost a little bit in the analysis. Kayla Dwyer, Indianapolis Star. Do you have any thoughts on the national election, how it turned out, or a terrific Republican year?
Yeah, thing about polling. I've been thinking a lot about this because I also, my gut instinct is to blame the polling, but I think maybe we're not contextualizing polling well enough. Polling is a snapshot in time, right? It's not really supposed to, I think, it's not really supposed to be a predictor per se. And maybe that's the problem. But also, there probably are fundamental flaws. Like, who is answering these polls? Like, in
who's not answering the poll?
Who's not answering the poll? Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
In an era where distrust of institutions defines one of the political parties more than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that they're supposed to correct for that in their sampling. Maybe they're not doing that enough. I'm skeptical that you're actually getting real people who are on the ground and down to earth answering these polls and having a true sense of what's going on. I agree in terms of the cell phone election. I would maybe narrow that down further and call it an algorithm election. First time that we're really completely entrenched in algorithms, I think. I don't know that we were so much in 2020 as we are now. I also was surprised by the margins. It was a coin flip for me whether it would be Trump or Harris, but the margins did surprise me a little bit, and it made me think. It's not so much. I'm not in the sense that, oh, I'm shocked at my country or whatever. It's actually, I turned inward and I was like, am I just out of touch? Probably. I really feel like it's hard when I don't. I feel like Elon Musk is controlling my Twitter feed because I see his tweets all the time. So I don't know if that's organic. And I follow people across the political spectrum. Certainly my Instagram is not organic. We're increasingly isolated society, disconnected from one another. My reactions to this election has been along a lot of those lines. What is this saying about my industry and the increasingly narrow segment of people who take any stock in what my industry has to say? And what does that mean for our information ecosystem? So I have a lot of existential thoughts about this election.
It's funny. The very first part of your answer sounded like you're reading a text exchange between Tom LoBianco and me. We talked about that quite a bit. Tom, this is my theory, and I want you both to weigh in, but Tom first. Quality of candidate, quality of campaign are the two most underrated aspects of elections in every district, but especially in national races. 2016, Hillary Clinton ran what I thought was the worst campaign at a major presidential level I've ever seen, until Kamala Harris in 2024. Republicans have run horrible campaigns.
Yeah.
George H.W. Bush in 92 comes out to mind. Democrats have run strong campaigns. Barack Obama, obviously, in 2008, he was very strong. I thought Carter's in 76 was pretty flawless. But campaigns and candidates matter a hell of a lot more than sometimes it's given credit for. Scale of 1 to 10. 1 is I'm an idiot. 10, I'm Tom LoBianco. How right am I?
Oh, you put it that way. I'm going to have to give it a 10.
But she ran, I don't know anyone who's taking up for her campaign. or her selection of VP. And I thought Trump's selection of VP was genius in the sense that he just let Vance do all the hard interviews. Like, you go out there and speak on our behalf. And it was clear, especially after the debate, that the Democrats weren't necessarily willing to let the governor of Minnesota do that.
Yeah, they ran a campaign that looked like something that Hillary did in 16. And that's no surprise based on who they brought in. Look at there was that, and you got to give credit to Tony Fabrizio, the main pollster for the Trump campaign, who rightly identified this, calling it a sugar rush. There was a sugar rush with Kamala Harris just being new. And look, that is a part of where the American electorate writ large is right now. People love novelty. It also gives you a sense of how little people generally pay attention. This kind of rides on with the Micah Beckwith discussion. In general, people don't pay a lot of attention to the seconds in command, but it wore off over time. And the problem that the Democrats had was they were still relying on the leaders from the Obama 08 and 12 elections. You had Kamala Harris, who is a professional politician. It never would have swayed things because they were at a deficit from the get-go. If, I've seen these takes where it's, oh, if only she had, taken a day to fly out to Austin, Texas to sit down with Joe Rogan, that wouldn't have worked. And part of the reason it wouldn't have worked was because, and we've talked about this before with Robert and I, we've talked about this in terms of politicians. It's muscle memory. Mm-hmm. Trump is built for a 3-hour podcast. Kamala Harris is built for a hard stop at 20 minutes on Howard Stern. Mm-hmm. And she gets in trouble if she does more than that because she doesn't know how to talk that way. And that's not a knock on her. That's professionally how she got where she is. But the world changed.
Forgive me. Do either of you think if Harris had chosen Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, that would have made any difference?
No.
Kayla?
Not really. I feel like the problems were like that. It's just she was tied to the Biden presidency, and that's irrespective of who her VP choice would have been.
As a journalist, because as a political hack, I was shocked. I keep saying that word. I was bemused, mortified that the Harris campaign didn't prepare its candidate better for the question, what would you have done different?
Oh, yeah.
They should have gamed that. Maybe they did, and she just forgot, so I shouldn't be blaming them on ignorance. But she should have said, look, Joe, I got to say 2 or 3 things. Biden has been in politics from the womb. He would have gotten it. And they should have really had her prepped with strong answers to that question. Kayla, that surprised you?
Yeah, I did think her responses to those questions were pretty weak. And it's like the question. So you should have had that ready. I agree with you. Yeah.
Tom?
They did. They've all had this problem. I saw J.D. Vance during the campaign. This is very normal of all candidates. Totally accessible, right? Like overly accessible. All right. And I was up on the Hill, up at the Capitol about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was when Matt Gaetz was still under consideration. Mm-hmm. And the motorcade pulls up, and it's a motorcade with the vice president-elect, Senator J.D. Vance. No questions at all. A lot of that's normal politicking. Candidates they love us when we can give them some exposure, and less so once they're in office. But I don't think there's anything that would have changed for the Democrats because they didn't know what they were working with. They didn't understand the playing field.
And how about their messaging? Because it's a hell of a journey from weird to joy to Hitler. And I just thought that they didn't really have a messaging thread, which regardless of party, you have to have if you're going to win, because that's what, and if you can say it in 15 seconds, because now in the days of YouTube pre-roll, that's as long as I got, then it resonates.
You know what? They were victims here. Everybody was victims in this. It's a building on Kayla here with the algorithms. Yeah, Trump talked about immigrants poisoning the blood of our country. That is Nazi rhetoric. Now, whether he recognizes that or understands it, whether the majority of Americans understand the historical context of that, um, is immaterial. That is what it is. Um, but what's clear is that communications is about getting through to people. And if
Mm.
half the country or whatever it is doesn't have that in their algorithm, they're never going to hear about it. So that when she goes on a debate stage and says, well, clearly this guy's acting like a Nazi, they're like, what are you talking about?
I
Well,
also
let
think
me ask. Go ahead, Kayla. Go ahead.
I also think like their messaging being primarily anti-Trump messaging, it just doesn't really, I don't see what the gain is from that because it's not like you're gonna convince, it's only gonna turn people off because he's so popular. So why not focus on what it is you have to offer the country? And I know that she tried to do some of that, but I don't think that's what was cutting through to people.
They started out that way and they lost track of it.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
that was a key problem for them. Absolutely. If they'd been, Trump made it so easy to make fun of him, which is gets to exactly that. Like they put out these things, they're like, clearly these immigrants are eating cats and dogs. Time to fricassee some cats.
Yeah.
And right. And then it's
But
like it's an easy thing, especially for somebody who hasn't done a lot of debates. It's easy to lock in on that.
it
And they
was low-hanging fruit, I feel.
yeah.
Yeah. It's just I actually know people in my life who I consider moderates for whom that wasn't effective because their primary concern is still the economy.
Yeah.
And they ended up voting for Trump despite all that stuff. That's really only effective for rallying up your own base that you already have. And
You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guests, our election year wrap up. We won't be able to do this next year unless you want to come on and talk about New Jersey. Tom LoBianco, longtime political journalist, and Kayla Dwyer, political correspondent, state house correspondent for the Indianapolis Star. Tilo, you mentioned it a few minutes ago. You actually beat me to it. Both of you, please weigh in. Is this the political obituary of Barack Obama? He threw himself in. He made sure that Kamala Harris was the anointed one, which I think was a colossal mistake. You got to season your candidates.
Hmm.
He lectured black men. He was everywhere they wanted him to be. He and his wife were a hell of a long way from 2008. If you're a Democrat, is he somebody you want showing up at your rally going forward?
You should. I think he's still good to show up at rallies, but the Obama campaign school is over. That much is gone. That style does not work for Democrats anymore. So, yeah, absolutely. Show up. He's an incredible still. Like, I mean, I watched him at the DNC a couple months ago, and his oratory is incredible. And he's still, and I look, black men and black women in particular did show up in big numbers, just not enough. But that style of campaigning is over. It's gone.
Kayla?
I think, yeah, the Obama coalition seems like a yesteryear conversation. I like just Trump remade the Republican Party in his image. I think what the Democrats need is some new person that inspires people. Obama did that, right? But
Oh,
we
if
need
you
to
were in
find a new one.
Indianapolis in 2008 or Indiana in Indianapolis, either one. Tom, were you here yet?
Not yet. Not at that point. No.
The Barack Obama campaign was as flawless as the Mitch Daniels reelect
Mm,
in a. No one can take that away from him.
wow.
He had rallies, anybody, I mean, it was something that Indiana hadn't experienced in. I couldn't even tell you. So you're not taking anything away from Barack Obama in 2008
Oh yeah,
but
no,
for
yeah.
you both to say,
Hmm.
look, in 2024 or 2028, that just doesn't work anymore. Who would be? Who are the kind of Democrats who you think can prevail in what is a significantly left of center primary process?
John Fetterman, I think, he gets it. AOC too. This new
That came to mind
AOC.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they really understand it incredibly well. My God, John Fetterman signed up for Truth Social. which is remarkable.
You've made Kayla beam since she's the Keystone State representative on the podcast today. What do you think of
Yeah,
Fetterman, Kayla?
I do think he's the type of person who, like, people like authenticity, right? And he's like a real person, and he comes off that way at least. And that's what the Democrats need to lead the party if they want any chance of capturing people on the ground, working class. Two-thirds of Americans don't go to college or something. What's the new stat on that? I think it's time for Democrats to get with the times if they want to be successful.
Mentioned,
Interesting. Is that declining college enrollment?
I
yeah.
think so. I heard that
Wow,
on the
fascinating.
radio this morning.
Oh
Do
boy.
you
I haven't
mentioned
looked it up yet, though. Maybe I shouldn't tout that statistic.
It was
you mentioned immigration a few minutes ago, Tom. And is there which set of rhetoric has more value politically in 2024 America? Let them all in, sanctuary cities, mass immigration with no checks and balances, or whatever you want to call the Biden Harris policy. Or, hey, I don't care if we let in 50 million people as long as they come through the process and do it legally. Because I've read several articles that how one of the main reasons why Trump did so well among Latinos is because the people who've actually gone through the process are like, what in the hell? It took me 6 freaking years. Now these folks are just being let in from Venezuela or whatever. So
well, yeah.
you have the rush and then you have the process. And it seemed that the Republicans did a better job of saying the difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration is a house party and breaking and entering.
And also, too, that it's not just the people who went through naturalization processes, the whole kit and caboodle, but also a lot of Latino immigrants here undocumented, illegally. They said that as well, that they don't want more people coming in. That's as a paisan whose respective families came here 100 or so years ago, is entirely unsurprising. Slam the door shut behind you. That was a very big dynamic. But I'm going to go back to the bigger issue here. What we are in right now is a William Randolph Hearst age of dominance of one form of media. And I think more of it has to do with what is pushed in front of people and what they're hearing about constantly. Our realities are shaped by that, our perceptions of politics. It's impossible for voters to be in Washington or at the border. They have to make these determinations based on what they deem to be reasonable information. And these algorithms are incredibly powerful. Yeah, I think that is whatever that narrative is. And then if you're a candidate, you speak to that narrative. That's more important than the actual policy.
Kayla, how do you feel when you write stories and they go on social media and they go on websites and they're shared and liked and all that stuff? Is what he's saying true you're at home in a newspaper writing about the city and the state and politics? Is that something you see as well? Hey, when I write about guns, this happens. When I write about abortion, this algorithm or this chart beat number hits.
It's hard to know what the algorithm's doing. I don't know if I like have enough insight into our numbers to answer that, but we can predict based on our data like what topics tend to actually breach and hit a lot of people. Beckwith is one of those. Abortion tended like it's all the hot button stuff. And I think that's part of this problem is like these processes incentivize us to focus very much on the divisive topics because nothing unifies people more than hatred, right?
Point taken.
And so it's a problematic information ecosystem for that because then those specific topics have outsized influence on the way people think about the world. And I think so much of state government, for example, 95% is boring and functional
Yes.
and important to our lives, but certainly not. My stories about Medicaid, which is extremely important, they don't really get read all that much. I still do them, But
It's
sometimes it's
also damn
hard to justify
complicated.
doing all of them.
It's so complicated. Keep your hands off my body. Keep your hands off my guns. That's just so simple.
So,
It
Yeah.
is. If people don't have time, then again, it's that muscle memory that makes them go back to wherever they feel safe, whether that's politically or anything else. Tilo, I'm going to be a Republican for just a few seconds, so please love me anyway. You know that those of us who read assiduously about the news media and social media and other things know what happened in 2020 with regard to Facebook and Google. Some of those more now have become more enlightened social media platforms or engines. So, what do you say to a Republican like me who is convinced that 2020, I don't think it was stolen, but 2020 was clearly the social media giants had their thumb on the scale for Joe Biden, and now it's 2024, and certain social media accounts are a lot more pro-Trump or conservative. Can you appreciate our glee?
I don't know how much in 2020 they were putting their thumb on the scale for Biden. I view it through a media lens. I see these guys as Mark Zuckerberg walking into the world of publishing, right? After having allegedly stolen this idea from the Winklevoss twins, based on depending on whose version of things you believe. um, and rapidly developing into a powerhouse. And by 2016, being a dominant force, but also a dominant force for Russians. And then responding to that, being like, okay, we're going to regulate things. We're going to deal with content. Regulating and dealing with content and that's our profession. That's editorial standards, which I would argue is a good thing. And I would also note is really friggin' hard. It's and when your entire platform is anybody can hop on, anybody can say anything. That's why we don't do a full paper of letters to the editor, because 90% of them will be about Bigfoot sightings riding drones over top of New Jersey. My God, even Larry Hogan fell for that one.
He did.
I was like,
an unexpected loser. I had high hopes that he was going to win his
I
Senate
know,
race there.
it was
in
terrible.
Maryland. Yeah.
But what's happening now is there was a really good piece that I read by this guy, Ted Gioia. It's The Honest Broker on Substack. Like, he's an old jazz critic out of Stanford, I think. It's probably his like mid to late 60s. He wrote about how these social media platforms, because they thrive on attention capture and retention, are becoming the shopping malls of their time, because they come in and they have to keep everybody inside. But over time, it degrades because the offerings are really all the same. And we're starting to see that happen. I've been thinking about this as a media business person now, which I think about this stuff a lot. And Google and those guys going down there I think they need to think more seriously about things, which they have never done before, which is what when you're an incredibly powerful publisher, there are certain responsibilities. And we know that professionally as journalists. Yes, this stuff, I'm trying not to curse here, is really hard.
Let me jump in and ask a question then. And Kayla, get your reaction first. We have just a few minutes left in the Leaders and Legends podcast. Tom LoBianco, Kayla Dwyer, journalist, our guest. Kayla first. What was your reaction to the fact that the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times, I believe, apparently were going to endorse Joe Biden, and then the owner said, no, you're not?
yeah, if I'm brutally honest, I didn't fully understand why that was such a big deal. I fully hear the arguments in favor of newspapers, like editorial boards weighing in because they've done a lot of research, they can form opinions based on a diverse set of people, and they have some influence. But in this era where there's a lot of suspicion cast on traditional media outlets and their participation in the political process, I don't know how much it actually adds anymore for these legacy outlets to say what they think, because who are they convincing anymore? And maybe I shouldn't say this as someone who works for a legacy outlet, but we haven't had an editorial board in I don't know how many years since I've
and
been
you
there.
haven't endorsed a presidential candidate in I don't know how many years. So the Star has
Yeah,
moved beyond that.
and I don't know what value add there is for us to do that. I think now I would like to see an editorial board come back so we can put out some informed commentary on issues affecting Hoosiers, but I don't know. I've never felt too warm and fuzzy about the endorsement process to begin with.
Tom, do you have a quick follow up? You know a lot of
Oh,
these folks on these boards.
yeah, absolutely. The endorsements are an anachronism. Absolutely. They come out of a time when newspapers were the dominant force, and that was a really important thing. Now, the way that Bezos and Patrick Soon-Shiong handled it was, I don't mind saying, as a reporter, was terrible
Yeah.
because they didn't state up front. What they could have done was told the editorial board, hey, this year we're not making an endorsement because for all the reasons that Kayla just stated, which are I personally I agree with. As a reporter in the field, having your editorial board picking a side makes it a lot harder for us,
Yes.
especially because readers don't differentiate between, okay, this side is only opinion. That's something that it comes out of journalism school. Okay. Readers who live normal lives and are not total junkies like we are, that doesn't cross their mind. What they should have done is said at the outset, hey, guys, you know what? It's over. It's outdated. We're not doing it this year. But instead, they waited until after their editorial boards had written the endorsements.
Yeah, that was bad.
And even now, I look at what Soon Shong is doing at the LA Times with these bias meters. And oh man.
Are you trying to make me cry before Christmas, Tom? Is that what you're trying to do? You got me in the holiday mood.
That's right,
Uh,
baby.
great. Be objective, and I won't answer my own question. I promise. Be objective as much as you can. We talked about candidates and campaigns, and I thought Trump ran a much better campaign, obviously. But grade the media. How did the media do in covering the presidential candidates? I'm only limited to that, Kayla, only because the governor's there wasn't a single close race in Indiana. When I know you pay attention to the national media, there's probably, if collectively the media isn't the most unpopular group of people, the only thing I could think of would be congressmen, members of Congress. How did the media do, Tom?
Tough. You're seeing legacy media in decline. And I think you saw, as noted earlier, a new mainstream media, which is podcasters and YouTubers. And I don't know how well they did because I'm still learning about them. I'm down the rabbit hole right now looking at who Stephen Bartlett interviews. On the one hand, he'll have on Walter Isaacson, who is, best I can tell, largely accurate and very insightful. But then he'll have on a toxicologist who says that these candles are making you infertile. I'm still figuring them out, but that is the new dominant media.
Evan Thomas, who used to work, I think, the Washington Post and
Mm.
Newsweek. So he's been on my podcast. He's actually coming on again before the end of the year. It's one of the questions I'm going to ask him now that he's somewhat separated. It's just how to grade it when you're not filing a story every day. Kayla?
Yeah, I guess fundamentally, who is the media in the question? Because I think like the term media I imagine it includes TV, it includes newspapers, and I almost would have different grades for different mediums. So like F. But I also tune out TV these days because I don't feel like I gain anything from the conversation on the broadcast networks. I just don't. It just is talking heads. But in general, it did feel like national media was falling over itself to catch up to the reality. Like we saw it with the Biden age thing, and there was a lot of rhetoric up until the last second, sort of expressing skepticism that he could do the job. Whereas the truth all along was he's too old. And I think catching up to that reality, it took the national media some time to do that, and maybe too much time. There were just like examples like that throughout this election cycle. And I just continually had this thought in my head of how connected is the national media anymore to real people? That's just it's the looming question. And this is myself as well. I'm not that I'm a national reporter, but we all should be asking ourselves that question. It just feels like we're ever disconnected. And I don't know what the answer is to that.
Tom, heading into 2025, who are you looking forward to covering?
Oh, regular people at the Buffalo Wild Wings.
B-dubs.
Kayla Dwyer,
Ooh.
heading into 2025, who are you looking forward to covering?
Well, looking forward is not the best term, but I think there will be a really major story unfolding with what's going to happen to Medicaid recipients in 2025 in Indiana. The cuts that are already being made, and then the uncertainty at the federal level. It's very unclear that there will be much done this session to ameliorate that situation, to be determined, but I'm considering a big part of my job is keeping tabs on the people that's affecting.
Tom, who's the unsung hero of 2024? Time named Donald John Trump as Man of the Year. Who would you have put as Time's Man of the Year?
Oh, it's Susie Wiles, the campaign manager, chief of staff for Trump. She made that all happen. Yeah.
Kayla, who is Kayla Dwyer's Person of the Year for 2024?
Oh, God. Oh, in Indiana?
Your call.
The many, I guess I can count on two hands. The women who have come forward about Thomas Cook and Greg Taylor, and more to come, potentially.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, podcast by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise. As always, all our interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister, the bestest and the cutest. Our guests today, Tom LoBianco, Kayla Dwyer. Tom, give your web address one more time.
24sight.news, 24sight.news.
Kayla Dwyer, Blanchard. Congratulations, Kayla, on your nuptials. Please give your newsletter website again.
indystar.com/newsletters/checks-and-balances.
Say it again.
indystar.com/newsletters. That's plural. /checks-and-balances.
Thank you so much for your time. I respect both of you more than I can say, and I'm grateful. Thank you for surviving what was an interesting year.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Vane.
Thank you,
Kayla.
Take care.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.